For this Thursday Thought segment of Follow the Reader, I've got a phenomenal guest that I can't wait to introduce you to. I hope you were tuning in yesterday as well. We had an amazing conversation with Radhanath Swami. On Tuesday we had Doug Abrams. I know that a lot of you were loving both those conversations about the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu as well. And today's guest, I promise you, is going to give you some phenomenal advice. And I hope that you're going to love this topic. This is something that I always like to get an expert on. It's something that I don't have any experience in. So I'm really looking forward to get some of my questions answered as well. But today's guest is absolutely special. She's a world-renowned psychologist, a New York Times best-selling author. And Oprah even said that she was one of her favorite parenting experts. And what I'd love for you to do is show your appreciation, show your love. Of course, you can do it virtually through all your likes and love for Dr. Shefali, who's joining me here today. And I'm so grateful to have you here.
Thank you. Same here. I'm so excited.
No, it's brilliant to have you here. And I'm so glad that we can really dive into this topic of the awakened family. So today we're obviously talking about Shefali's new book, which is called The Awakened Family. Her first book, The Conscious Parent, was the New York Times bestseller. And this is all about a revolution in parenting. Now, I've been flicking through this book, and I was also watching your interview on Super Soul Sunday, which is how we connected.
Yes.
And Oprah actually said that parents, you'll be awed and wowed by her. Now, that must have felt unbelievable.
Well, you know, it's always special when Oprah endorses you and believes in the message. And I think the reason she plugged into this message is because it transcends parents and non-parents. This is for every person who's ever been in any relationship, in any sort of family, and we all have been in families and been children raised by parents. And I think Oprah recognized that this was a transcendent message that had the potential to heal and free all of us. Because all of us have grown up with parents who were largely unconscious. And we all have to kind of work out the emotional load they put on us and figure out now who are we despite what they did to us, you know.
In this book, The Awakened Family, I want to ask you, what does a conscious parent or what does an awakened parent look like? Like, what is that? Because I'm not sure anyone knows what that is today.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a fixed, definable entity. It's not an end point. I always say that consciousness and awakening is a process that we commit to. It's something that we have to, on a moment-by-moment basis, raise ourselves and lean into. But in the ideal world, if I was to peg a definition, I would say an awakened parent is one who recognizes that their child came to them as much as they entered their child's lives. And so it's a mutually reciprocal relationship where both teach each other how they both need to grow. So the parent has an equal obligation to learn from the child. And therefore you have to see your child as a sovereign spirit. You cannot see your child as someone you're going to control or manage. This is a mutually reciprocal relationship where both are mirroring each other and teaching each other. So this is an invitation to every child to raise their parent and for every parent to raise themselves through the parenting process.
I wanted to ask you this. I was reading this and you said that you say most parental anxiety comes from fear. Explain what you mean by that.
Well, whether we like to admit it or not, fear is the primary undergirding emotion in life, in all of relationships. And in fact, you talk about this so much, about how culture subjugates us in these belief systems that are really predicated on fear. And our entire life becomes about unraveling from fear. And who are the main guides and ushers of our early existence? Our parents. So if they are riddled by fear, and they are subjugated and imprisoned by this culture that is just swirling in fear, then it's quite natural that we're going to absorb that. And then, like all of us soul searchers and soul seekers spend our entire life, moving from fear into courage. So what if we as parents recognize this from the start and understood that we have a choice to not buy into the fear that's permeating in this culture? We have a choice. So every time our child comes home with a C grade and we find ourselves rising in fear, embedded, paralytic with fear, we have a choice to understand that this is how culture wants us to envelop ourselves in, or break free from that fear. Yes, help our children and support our children, but not be permeated in fear. Releasing our children from fear. But first, we have to recognize that it exists, work on the fear in our own lives, unravel from those belief systems and then choose a path of freedom.
And it's tough, isn't it, to choose that path of freedom?
It is very tough.
We're surrounded by it. You go to a networking event, you go to a family party or a family event, and all the conversations are around the children's grades or the children's performance.
What does he do? What are you doing? What's the achievement? What's the success story? So everything is pressure towards this one pivotal, apparently the uber goal of life, which is what? Apparently it's happiness, right? So we're sending our children, I say cattle to the slaughterhouse, promising that there's happiness, but you and I know there is no happiness at the end of this rainbow, right? So our children, we delude them into believing, climb this mountain, climb another mountain. Oh, you didn't get married yet. Oh, you didn't have children yet. So these poor children are just following us, and then there's a breakdown. And thankfully and hopefully that breakdown is severe enough that you then break open and go deeper, right? But we don't want that to happen. Why do we have to break down to break in? Why? Why does that have to happen? What if we gave our children the gift of this freedom that is their right? It's very hard to do. I mean, you're not a parent yet, but when you become a parent, all the pressures that you had quadruple when you have a child. Yeah. And the noise from culture is so hard to separate from. But this is the path of the conscious parent. It's a hard one, but it's a well-deserving one.
Amazing. So I've just been both challenged and warned that my troubles when I do become a parent will be quadrupled from when I was just a child. Shefali, I like what you were speaking about now, and you also mentioned in the book, you say we shouldn't treat our children like easels. And it's kind of like what you're saying. Now, can you explain that a bit more and say how we do that or how people experience that?
Well, I think in no other journey than the parenting journey is there a hidden unconscious ownership of these beings. Now, you can't blame the parent. The child does, quote unquote, come from you, or you're raising them from birth or from a long time. So this delusion of ownership is so easy to place on your children. And we know in Eastern mysticism that one of the greatest causes of suffering is this delusion of attachment and ownership. So here you have a child, you think you're actually doing good to the world and yourself, but then, hey, you find yourself mired in the greatest egoic trap possible, because your ownership, the delusion of ownership and attachment, I mean, where more will it rise, greater than in this relationship? You do own them, you are in charge of them, they do come from you, you're attached to them, boom. So your identity is now fused with that of your child. You lose perspective. That detachment that we yearn for, that is the gold for spiritual development, is lost in the parenting process. But if you can drive in New York, you can drive anywhere. If you can create detachment and spiritual perspective in the parenting process, you can do it in any relationship. So I challenge parents to see your children not as your easels or not as your puppets, not as your minions, but truly as their own sovereign beings that are coming through you, as Khalil Gibran so beautifully said, where you have the opportunity to be raised by them. How about we turn the paradigm around?
That's incredible, right? That's an incredible challenge and paradigm shift for all of us. Is that how do you now become raised by children? I'm sure there's lots of younger people in the audience going, yeah, I think that's right. I'm sure they're agreeing with you.
And raised as in spiritually raised, right? Spiritually elevated, where every moment your child is defying you or resisting you or tantruming and you can't control them, you go, what is this about my thirst for control? What is this about my need for superiority that is coming back to me? How can I go within myself and create that significance within and not use my child to give me that sense of worth?
Wow, incredible. This is totally blowing my mind right now. Guys, I hope you're enjoying this conversation and getting lots of insights and wisdom from it. I know that I am just listening to Shefali right here. So Chirag says, I think we all need to live consciously. I went into parenting assuming it was natural and common sense, but I think I would be a much better parent if I didn't try to serve my children in a default mode. And you feel that, right? A lot of people just feel it's a natural. You talk about that in your book.
I do. It's one of the myths of parenting, that parenting is natural. It's biological in some instances, but it should not be natural. It's instinctive, it's conditioned, it's habitual, but it's not something that you're naturally going to be able to do. Why? Because you've never seen this being in your life before. You should not presume, just because they came, quote unquote, from you, that they are you. They are not you. They are a spirit that need to be encountered on their terms. And that is the hard part. We don't want to encounter them on their terms. That's not why we had children.
Yeah.
We had children so they could make us feel better, so that they could improve our lives. But then we quickly realize, wow, I didn't bargain for this. Or maybe I should have another child. And then you have the second one. You're like, oh, the third one. The third one I'm going to get right. And it's this pursuit of superiority, of significance, of worth through our children that is the greatest trap. And it needs to end because we're causing suffering and pain.
So much of this is actually a wake-up call, I feel, because these are the kind of things we always hear, and we will dive into these, but I love it because in her book, Shefali talks about how these are all myths that you're busting.
Yes.
And I love that because these myths have become reality. We don't even see them as myths. We see them as truths or simple truths, and we hear them everywhere. I'm taking another question here from Kevin. Dr. Shefali, how does a parent let go of their past lessons to allow their child to engage in the current age? For example, parents don't want their kids on technology all the time, yet we are in an intensive tech area that our kids really try to embrace. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, tech is a big thing, especially for parents of my generation, because we are seeing for the first time a generation growing up on technology, and it scares us because we don't have that much control over our children now. Now they're engaging with their friends and their social circles without us constantly hovering over them. This deeply threatens our sense of power and superiority. So I think the first thing I encourage parents to do is recognize where their fear is coming from. If it's coming from a deep desire to be involved in their children's lives, then to create that connection in another way. You know, what's another way you can deeply be involved in your children's life? It actually forces parents to create that space for presence and connection. Because if we don't, there's something always going to be pulling at your child's attention. So you have to decide how it is that you want to be an attractor for your child that's far beyond and above Snapchat and their video games. You have to become that attractor. So that takes presence, slowing down, creating space, and deeply connecting with your child. And parents say, who has time for that? Well, if you don't have time for your child to deeply connect, your child will fall prey to all these amazing things out there. There are too many distractions. So this is actually a calling to us to be more present, to have boundaries, and to be the one who is deeply connecting with your child so that Snapchat is not more attractive than you.
That's hard. I mean, many of people will struggle at the moment to feel that they can compete with Snapchat.
Right.
And is it a competition, or is it, you know, how would you, I love that because in the book you talk about the best thing a child can get from the parent is that presence.
Yes.
Right? And you also talk about the clash of time zones.
Yes.
So you're saying that, you know, parents want to live in the future and where their kids are going, and the kid wants to live in the now.
Yes.
Because they don't look at it that way. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Well, first, it's not, it feels like a competition. So if we buy into that, then we're going to, you know, always be threatened. So we have to watch that within us. Yes, it does feel like a competition because your kid is fully, wholly, solely enveloped in a whole world that you're not part of. So you feel left out and you feel like you don't have any influence on that world. So you have to watch that in yourself. And then in terms of the clash of time zones, very young children especially are the portals, I believe, to the greatest presence. And many parents miss that opportunity, that window that young children give you to be in the present moment. Because as our children grow up, they also get sucked into the culture just like we have, and they forget to be in the present moment. So, but even older children, even teenagers have a far greater capacity to stay in the present than we parents do. So our children will always push us and say, stop worrying about my future. You can't predict my future. You have no control over my future. Let go of the past. Be here with me now. What a great invitation.
Yeah, it's a great invitation, and definitely one that I think a lot of parents probably hear, but may not know how to respond, which is exactly how you're showing us to do that in these conversations. In this book again, we're talking about children and how we are really looking at the kids and just people are trying to do their best. There's this default, I would like to believe that parents love their children.
Yes.
And are trying their best, and they feel they're trying their best, but it's backfiring, as you say.
Well, I think love is without question, right? So we should just take that out, because the parents' excuse is always, but I love my child. And I say to parents, you know, half jokingly, your love this is not about love.
Right.
This is about something far deeper, far more significant. It's about generations of emotional baggage that's really coming and interfering in the present moment. And your anxiety, your deep anxiety to become something through your child. So that's one of the first steps in disentangling this process of parenting. You have to separate yourself from who it is your child is. That means you have to be full within yourself. You have to fill your own inner cup. You have to be deeply attuned to your own self and fill your own needs, meet your own expectations. And then when you realize that you are fully empowered, you will set your child free to be themselves without all that anxiety that, oh, please be perfect and please be a success for me. No child should bear that burden, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something we can all relate to. I'm sure many of you watching can resonate, that you've been bearing that burden almost and carrying it.
Yes.
And that affects the decisions we make in our life, from
completely.
Something as small as, you know, what we studied early on in life, all the way through to who we get married to, which country we live in, the kind of beliefs we hold.
Yes, and more than even the external choices, how intimate we are with our own inner voice.
Wow.
You know, I see in many moments in my day that I will rob my child out of her deep intimacy with herself. So she wants to go somewhere and I will exert my influence and I will snatch her and make her go another way. I may be aware of it perhaps 24 hours later, but I've done that in that moment. And if I had a compliant child, which I don't, if I had a compliant child, I would have completely displanted her, transplanted her from her authentic voice. And that's not good. We should not do that for our children.
That's true, because that voice becomes substituted by the other voices.
By external sources.
Yeah, external sources.
So anyone can take the substitute, right? Anyone can come in as a substitute. Who's a substitute today, right? But that's why you have to plant your child in, and they are planted. We transplant them.
Right. And can a parent actually enhance a child's conversation with their inner voice? So is there any way, or is that the parent just needs to move out of the way? Or can they actually enhance and amplify that?
Well, I think both, right? So first is to move away, because if we sufficiently give space, that will blossom. There is no doubt, right? It's the vacuum effect. When you are out, there will be something to fill it. The child's inner voice will come forward. And then, of course, there are things to, open-ended questions, not being inquisitive beyond what's needed, right? Not giving your opinion, not preaching, not sermonizing. Very hard to do. It sounds so easy, but it's to bite your lip and let your child blossom forth with their own guidance is inordinately hard.
And I'm listening to you thinking, yeah, I've got this, I can do this, and then...
It's so easy, just be quiet, just be silent. The hardest thing to do, because they pull you, or you feel as if they're pulling you.
Yeah, and I love this because you're speaking about this very much as a partnership. So you talk in the book about how previous traditions were that the parent is greater, the parent is the guide, and parents struggle with that partnership because they feel they have more experience, they feel they know more, and they also want to protect the child. I think protection.
Is the key.
Yeah, let's go into that now, like protection. So one side is growing, but you don't want your child to get into bad habits, or what you call bad habits for them.
Right. So we see the wreckage of our lives and our mistakes, and we're still recovering from our own wreckage, and we want nothing more than our children to not go through that. But what we fail to understand is that life is part wreckage, right? Life is part building from the ground up, right? So we are, in our desire to protect our children out of great love, we're actually going to rob them of their intrinsic right to have wreckage in their life. So we can protect them for so long, but we know come 12, come 15, the wreckage is round the corner. Now, can we have the perspective to understand that in the wreckage will come the growth, will come the gold? So much easier said than done. So much easier said than done. But this is how we grew up, right? We grew up creating gold from wreckage. Why can't we have faith that our children will go through that themselves?
Yeah, we almost want to give them gold
without the wreckage. But it doesn't exist. They go inextricably together, right? It's not through pain comes pleasure, but through pain comes growth. Right? Exactly. It just does.
Yeah, and we see it all the time that even children who do start with gold still have to go through wreckage. There's
no insurance policy, right? So people look at me and go, oh, your daughter's never going to make mistakes, so she's never going to go off the beaten path. And for me, that's almost like a curse. They're almost cursing me, and I go, no. She must go off the beaten path. She must find herself. She must fall apart, and she must self-destruct at some point in order to find her own way of imprinting her destiny and finding her voice.
One of these myths that I really like, myth number 2, is actually a successful child is ahead of the curve. Let's dive into that.
Yeah. Well, I think our culture, especially here in New York, I don't know whether you felt it yet,
yes,
but it's driven by success, and it's driven by going ahead of the curve and always competing and just racing ahead. And at some point, we have to all of us have to stop and ask, what is the end goal here? You know, where are we all racing toward? What is this pinnacle going to deliver? And it does deliver a false promise of joy and contentment, because joy and contentment can only be discovered from the inner landscape, right? So it's the wise that discover that, and this is the gift we have to give our children, that there is their resource for joy and spontaneity and play and pleasure lies within them. There is nothing on the outside that can deliver that.
Amazing.
But we have to believe that, right?
Yeah,
fully believe it.
And that takes time, right? It takes time. Does it take, the parents need to have time for personal reflection to, is it almost, so let's say this is great for me,
yeah,
because it's a preparation, it's
yeah,
before, you know, I'm not in the process of having children or anything like that, so it's a great way of building your consciousness,
yes,
and preparing your consciousness.
Yes, yes.
But what about for parents who have already had children, have young children, which I know you speak to all the time? How do they kind of rewire what they've already been doing?
Well, you can't go back, right? So this is not about going back in regret or guilt and now hovering in some past space, which is the tendency, right? You feel guilt. So this is about recognizing that whatever's happened to bring us to this moment, and the greater the unconsciousness, often greater the change, right? Often the greater the baggage, it's the tipping point. So now use this moment as the tipping point, as the precipice for leaping out and entering the present moment. So we have to come back to the present moment, right? You always have to come back to this moment. You can't go back. So no matter what you did in the past, you have to come to this moment.
There you go. So don't waste time in the past. If you feel, and I know that there'll be many of you feeling out there that maybe you weren't able to do your best at a certain time, maybe there were certain circumstantial challenges, personal challenges, but just start from now. Just start from now. Yes. When you've learned, grown, evolved, you can begin that journey now. So I hadn't prepped Shefali for this before. Dr. Shefali, she's here right now. I'm doing an on-the-spot round with a lot of our guests, okay, where I ask them quick-fire questions, and I like to get their fast, speedy answers. Now, I think you're going to be great at this.
Okay.
So Shefali, these are the questions I had for you. So I want you to start off by describing in one word, right? Okay. Just one word. Meeting Oprah.
Magnificent.
Amazing. So Oprah's a massive fan of Dr. Shefali. If you go on her website, you'll be able to see all the great work that they've done together. So make sure you do check that out on Dr. Shefali's website as well. Second, describe in one word, becoming a mother.
Humbling.
Nice. Becoming a mother who leads parenting or teaches parenting.
The word is just humbling, you know, even more humbling, right?
Yeah. I'm going to go slightly off track. Do you sometimes get cynicism from other mothers?
Yes.
Who are,
all the time. This is not a popular message. This is, I'm sure a lot of people get turned off by this message because it's asking them to look in the mirror at their deepest shadows and see how they're projecting it onto their children. This is not a populist message. It's a message that people have to grow into. Oprah said that we are 20 years ahead of our time. The zeitgeist hasn't come, but this is why we're here. We're going to push the moment so that we don't wait another 20 years and the ambiance changes. So a lot of skepticism, or a lot of like, oh, but you're privileged, or you only have one child, or you have a girl. You know, people always find something to say, why can't I do this? What they're really saying is, I don't know whether I can do this. You can do it because it's easy for you, because whatever. I don't know whether I can do this. So it's just helplessness, really, which creates a resistance.
Sure, but what I love about your message, like what I connect with, is that it really goes to the roots. Like you're really going right down to the root of the issue, the core challenge. You're not looking at the symptoms, you're not looking at the kind of, you know, it's so nice to have parenting buzzwords that you see today, and 5 tips on this and 10 tips on that. But to actually ask parents to actually look in the mirror, deal with all their own issues.
Yeah, not easy.
It's not easy, but I love that, because if we can start that process, even just starting that journey, will have a massive impact. Anyway, back to the on the spot round, guys. So get ready for this. So I'm asking her. So I want your best conscious parenting advice for the following people.
Okay.
Right. First one, Kim Kardashian.
Oh, that. Worry less about your image and care more about being deeply present, because you will be even more beautiful when you are.
Amazing. Kourtney Kardashian.
Oh, you seem to have a great voice, I wish you would use it more to communicate conscious ideas.
Brilliant, wonderful. David Beckham.
Be careful not to overshadow your children with your bounty, with your glory. Just always be careful about how bright your light shines, so it doesn't overshadow them.
Really important consideration.
Because he's huge, right? So you have to be careful. You know, you have to kind of dim yourself a little bit for your children to come forward.
Wow.
Right.
Wow. Do you think any parents have done that quite well? I when you were saying that, I was thinking of someone like Will Smith. So with his kids, you know, you see Jaden and Willow. And, I mean, are there any other parents that you can think of that?
Well, I don't know what happens behind the doors,
of
but I think it's pivotal for celebrity type parents to be aware that they cannot overshadow their children. They must step down from the pedestal and offer their children the ladder up.
Wow.
Right? Even though the whole world puts you on a pedestal, just in your own home, you need to step it down a bit. Conscious parenting advice for Jessica Alba. Jessica Alba, my goodness, you're presuming I know all these people. You're a mom with a mission, so I would just say, thank you to her for following her intuition and using her child as the muse for this company that she's created. What a great thing, right? That's the ultimate.
Brilliant. Advice you would give to your younger self?
Well, I said this on Oprah, that I grew up, I think, my entire 20s just racing ahead, constantly restless, not fully in the present, because I wanted to get to this point, and I never believed that it would have happened. So looking back, I wish I had believed more, trusted more, slowed down more, enjoyed more, because I just didn't. I was just perspiring on the way up. So I didn't enjoy the journey. But in retrospect now, I wish I had and slowed down. Can you enjoy the journey? Can you enjoy the journey? And if you slowed down, would you be here today sharing the great wisdom that you are with so many people across the world? I don't know. I'm asking as a genuine question from my heart. Like we were talking about, it's the wreckage that brings the growth. So would I change anything really? No. But I think it's a lesson for the moment, right? How do I want to operate for the next decade? Exactly. Right? And I want to remember that it may manifest, so what's the rush, right? What if it's right around the corner? Why are you driving yourself crazy? It's just coming, so sit with it and attract it rather than run toward it. And what do you believe at age 70, 80, 90, whatever age it is, what would be your regret of things you didn't do? So not what you did do, but what you didn't do. What would it be? So I'm trying to live the moment, imagining a no regret situation, so I can do and live fully in the now. I think the biggest thing I would regret is not being present as much as I can for my child, my partner, my friends. So just remembering that, right? I don't want to end up there regretting. I don't want to do that. So I have to embody the presence right here. Right now. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. The best bit about parenting? The best bit? Yes. The madness of it, the unpredictability of it, the humor. What humor? Right? Only children can bring such humor. Laughing at yourself, laughing at yourself. It's just a playful approach to life because they're not attached to outcome like we are. They're fun. They're fun people. They're the most fun people ever. Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Worst bit about parenting? They bring out the monster in you and you have to confront it and see your undeveloped, horribly immature self. I mean, that's the hardest thing, to see yourself in the mirror. Amazing. So now, the best parenting advice you ever received, not gave, but you ever received? The best parenting, I received so much, but I think it's from wisdom traditions that teach you to remember that there's a long perspective that you have no privy to. This has been coming down the pike for lifetimes and will continue on beyond you. So relax in this moment. You think you can control this moment, but there's so much your child already knows and is divinely intelligent. So plugging into the divine intelligence of my child has been the best lesson for me. Amazing. And I want to dive into this a bit because you brought it up. You speak about how the Eastern traditions, these ancient traditions inspire your work. Where did all of that get mixed in with tradition? Like, you know, ancient wisdom and wisdom that is old and we're kind of reconnecting with it. You spoke about ownership and attachment. Where did that get lost in tradition and expectation? Where did that happen? I know. I think it's because wisdom has to be grown into and has to be developed.
Beautiful,
but because it's so unachievable if you don't develop it, so we take the short circuit, which is we create the ritual or the quick prayer or the tradition, but that's not wisdom, right? Wisdom is sitting in stillness, deeply detached, living in the impermanence. Like, that's scary stuff. So we create a short circuit too, and we call it wisdom, but it's just tradition. It's being mired in more intellect, more belief system, more separatism, right? So it's very easy for me to see how that gets lost, because wisdom is, you kind of understand it, you have to live it, right? But tradition I can do.
Yes.
Let's do a tradition. That's so easy, right? But wisdom is sitting with myself. That's hard.
Wisdom has to be grown into, Dr. Shefali. That is beautiful. I absolutely love that. And I think sometimes we're trying to speed up people's growing, which you can't do.
You can't do it.
Which, sometimes we can't even speed up our own growing. We've got this great question from the audience here about how do you make your child feel more secure and deal with the challenges that they're having in their life when they're feeling loneliness, bullying, all that kind of stuff that's going on. How does a parent get involved in that process?
Well, it's hard to watch your child in pain. I think nothing is harder for a parent than watching their child in pain. But I think we have to understand that our children are going to be bullied at some point. They are going to be brokenhearted. They are going to fail. They are going to be crushed. They are going to be isolated. This is the part we were, right? I remember, and we kind of muddled through it. So instead of muddling our children through it, what if we let them understand that this is life and they are resilient enough to handle it, rather than be anxious that it happened. So embracing it rather than running away from it.
I'm seeing here a question from Jiggy. I love your points. Quick question. I understand that it's important to love and nurture your children, but what would be your advice to parents who are overly biased towards their own children because they see them as an extension of their legacy? There is a fine line between loving duty rewards your kids and being blinded by bias of them being little yous.
Well, this is what we're trying to deconstruct, that the moment you believe that they're yours, there lies the problem. There lies they're my children, so I'm going to race you to the top of the curve. I'll trample on the rest of your class. I don't care about what happens to the neighborhood. I want to get my kid up ahead. This is because we fuse our ego with their identity. This is the problem. So that's why I talked about detaching from your children. Your children are in no way yours or have anything to do with your emotional legacy unless we are unconscious. If we're unconscious, they have everything to do with us, right? We think they're ours. And then we create separatism, we create hierarchy. This is the problem. This is why we have violence in the world, because we teach our children to compete. We teach our children that they are ours, so they're better. And they're not. Every child is our child, right? When we have that oneness philosophy, then the world is going to change.
I mean, these are just such powerful principles, and I hope that they're kind of, there is some advice that we hear and we get it straight away, and there's some advice that just takes months, days, years to sink in, and I'm hoping that this is not going to take a while for us to sink into, because what I'm hearing, just that principle in itself, that actually if we could all just live as if every child was yours. In the best way. I'm not saying everyone's got to extend themselves, and you're not saying that either. But just being able to realize that this is not my child.
This is not my child. It's a hard thing to give up, because the reason we had a child was to have my child. So now I'm saying give it up. But in here, in this giving up, will lie freedom. Because then you can give up everything, right? And then you're detached from the hold of everything. Then you're free. And that you're so right about that my being such a reflection of our own selves, because I was speaking at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking to a very senior partner at this very well-known organization, and I was speaking to him about the principle of extending yourself beyond what you think is yours. And he was saying that actually the first time he ever thought about anyone else in the world apart from himself was when he had a child. But even then, you get mired. It's the opportunity to be selfless, but you can't just be selfless for your child. Right? Now you have to extend it out. So the first breaking down of the ego happens when you have a child. Okay, I'm not going to just think about myself. But we need to go beyond that, right? Even more beyond that.
And that's an incredible journey to go on. So I actually wanted to ask you about this. What's the best advice your daughter's ever given you? Has she ever?
Oh my God! Every day to hold my own opinion and not impose it. It's great that you are who you are, but I'm not who you are, and constantly telling me to just mind my own space. Keep your business to yourself in a way. Don't put it on me, because I can't be controlled. I will not be controlled.
Amazing. I love how honest you are about that as well, because it's beautiful to see that you are living the philosophy you're speaking about.
Well, I'm trying. It's not. It's not easy. And when I forget, I know I'm forgetting at least, right? I'm just like giving into the ego because I have no choice at that moment, and then I grow from it.
And I think that's great to know that we all do that.
Yes.
We all do give into our ego. We give into our anxieties. We give into our fears. But it's how we deal with our imperfections that makes us help teach other people about perfection. It's not about us putting a glossy view over ourselves and saying everything's perfect.
Absolutely.
What about your husband? Does he give you good advice? Does he agree with the philosophy? How does he feel about it?
Well, it's hard for someone to live with someone like me, right? It's annoying, I'm sure, to constantly be present and conscious, right? You want to be free from this sometimes, right? You just want to indulge. So I have great empathy for him, but I think he's a great supporter, and I could not do this work if I didn't have a true believer in him, right? You need someone who may not buy into it every moment of the day like I demand, but truly believes and supports you.
If you're interested in the conversation we're having, have ordered the book today. It is right there on Amazon. You can order it today. The Awakened Family, A Revolution in Parenting by Dr. Shefali. I promise you it will go much deeper into each of these principles that we're discussing today. What would you say to someone who is considering leaving their job to be a stay-at-home parent? I want to support my wife with my time more and be present as much as possible for my young children, but I'm afraid I may not set them up for success financially later. It's a tough one. I mean...
Well, it sounds like he has a choice. Many people don't even have a choice. So when you don't have a choice, you don't have a choice. But if you had a choice, what a great thing to be able to spend those early years at home. And again, he's already mired in a fear, predicting a dismal future. And I would say to Randy is, go for it. You know, these are the only few years you'll have with your children at home. If you have a choice, there is nothing better for your spiritual evolution than to be at home with them. And don't interfere, right? Who said that they're going to be financially worse off because of this? Who said that? Well, if you have a choice, I would say go for it. Enjoy this time home with your children, because you'll never get it back, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's an amazing time.
You'll never get it back, exactly. That's one thing we can't buy is time, so that's definitely not possible. Now, I had this really interesting thought, because I believe that my parents taught me a lot of this unconsciously or subconsciously. And at times they just let me be free and wild and let me do what I want. And that's kind of how I learned, made my mistakes, etc. Some of their decisions were phenomenal for my future. Some of their decisions were limiting, or at the time now on hindsight. But my question is that I'm sure everyone who's listening today wishes that their parent had this book when they were raising. And therefore I hope that the parents of the future are going to read this book. But my question is that how does a child now who didn't have a conscious parent still have gratitude, see the positive, and grow and appreciate the little awakening their parents may have had? You know, so how, if we flip it and look at it from the child's perspective now?
Well, the same way, you know, as we're teaching parents that this precise child came to you so you can wake up, well, in the same way, the child attracted you so they can wake up. Right? We are there for them to develop too. And through the messing up, they will develop in some way, either consciously or unconsciously. We chose each other, right? So now as a grown child, right, now us as grown-ups, look back on our parents, we have to embrace that we chose them too. So what did they do for us on a soul level, right? If we looked at these as soul partnerships or soul contracts, not just parent and child, because that's limiting, right? Our poor parents didn't know any better. We don't know any better, right? We only know to the level of the expansion of our consciousness. But what if, you know, every time I read my book, I expand more. But I wasn't the same way 10 years ago, even myself. So this is not about doing it right. This is about understanding that we come to each other to evolve. So we have to kind of forgive our parents, if there's such a thing. Because I don't believe we need to forgive anyone. It's about understanding that we attracted them, they attracted us, we created this to grow.
Beautiful.
We keep attracting each other to grow.
Definitely.
That's it, right.
Definitely. And that transpires through